joining us today. My name is Rachel Vallender. I'm the Director of External Engagement and Partnerships for COP15. Bonjour à tous. Je vous souhaite la bienvenue au Pavilion du Canada à la COP15 et merci d'être avec nous aujourd'hui. Je m'appelle Rachel Vallender. Je suis la Directrice d'Engagement Externe et Partenariat pour COP15. I am pleased to introduce our next event, Key Biodiversity Areas, a tool for effective biodiversity conservation in Canada, hosted by Wildlife Society, Conservation Society Canada and NatureServe Canada. C'est avec plaisir que je vous présente notre prochain événement, les zones clés pour la biodiversité, un outil pour une conservation efficace de la biodiversité au Canada, organisé par la Wildlife Conservation Society Canada and NatureServe Canada. Dr. Kira Routset-Hearn with Wildlife Conservation Society Canada will open the event. Vous avez la parole.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to pass the microphone to Stephen in 2 seconds, but I just wanted to first acknowledge that we're here in Montreal, which is the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Mohawk Nation. It's also been, over time, a traditional gathering area for many other First Nations and Indigenous peoples of Canada. Key biodiversity areas are found across Canada in all types of territories and pretty much all on the territories of Indigenous peoples of Canada. It's this long-term stewardship and relationship with the land that Indigenous peoples have permitted rare plants, birds, beetles, flowers, mammals to persist over thousands of years and continue to persist. So in the Key Biodiversity Area project, we're committed to listening to Indigenous peoples and supporting Indigenous-led conservation around key biodiversity areas. So I wanted to say that first, and now I'm going to ask Stephen Woodley, who is the Vice Chair for Science and Biodiversity of IUCN's World Commission on Protected Areas, and he's going to talk a little bit about the context of why key biodiversity areas are being identified in Canada.
Good evening. There's lots to be frustrated about at these negotiations. Negotiations are going slow, but here's an event to get really excited about, because this is a great program, and it's really worth cheering about. So I think I'm looking at no bunch of people in this room. People know what key biodiversity areas are. They're an IUCN standard for identifying areas important for the persistence of biodiversity globally. Okay, so it was developed by IUCN, and for my sins, I co-led a task force that did that development. It took us 5 years, and we met all over the world. The program worked by actually bringing together a whole bunch of standards under one umbrella. So key biodiversity areas and butterfly areas, other standards are under one systematic science-based standard that applies to all taxa, all ecosystems in the world. It's being rolled out now by something called the Key Biodiversity Areas Partnership, and you can see the logos on the screen there. These are the major NGOs in the world that have they've joined together in a legal partnership, which doesn't happen very often. A legal partnership to make this happen, and it's supposed to be rolled out nationally. And what you're going to see is the national rollout in Canada of what is a global area, and it's the best of them all. Canada's doing the best rollout of the standard on the planet. Here's where all the countries in green are where there's active programs right now where it's being rolled out. Programs in yellow are getting started, so there's a lot going on globally. There is a database of 16,000 sites that's being used by all kinds of groups in the world, but Canada, I can honestly say, is doing just a fabulous job, and everybody's excited about the work that's going on here. Lots of people use this, and I'm just going to give you a few ideas for the people who are using this KBA standard. It's used to guide investment. So the GEF, the Global Environment Facility, which is being talked about here, is using it to guide where money goes in the protected area business worldwide. The private sector's using it. It's available to the private sector so that they know what the development constraints are as they think through their development opportunities. We developed along with the standard a guide for business for how to operate in key biodiversity areas. It's also being used as an indicator for lots of global processes. For example, the Sustainable Development Goals, KBAs, and the coverage of KBAs is being used in that. So one thing Canada did really well is it adapted the global standard to a national level. This was led by Justina and people on this stage. It has been a huge addition and something that everybody in the KBA world is very excited about. So from a global perspective, this program is rocking it, and I'm going to stop there and turn it over to you guys.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview about the national process. There's 2 microphones, I guess they're both recording. So key biodiversity areas, Stephen already gave the definition. They're sites that contribute significantly to the persistence of biodiversity. So it's a very specific mandate. It's not the only tool we need in Canada to identify places that are really important for biodiversity, but it does identify in a really robust, scientifically credible way sites that are disproportionately important to making sure that we don't lose biodiversity. So you can identify key biodiversity areas using a set of 5 different criteria and some sub-criteria. Each criterion is associated with quantitative thresholds. So if you have the best experts involved and the best available data, you follow this global standard, you end up with a set of KBAs that is robust and credible and that everyone can get behind. And that's sort of the idea. That it's another tool, but it's a tool that captures things that we haven't been able to capture before and under one umbrella, as Stephen pointed out before. So just to say that it captures things like threatened biodiversity, both species and ecosystems. It captures rare species and ecosystems that are geographically restricted, so that's a lot of the times endemic species and ecosystems. It captures ecosystems that are the highest ecologically intact places, so places with a globally recognized ecological integrity. It captures biological processes, so these are sites where species aggregate in large numbers during a particular part of their life cycle, and it also captures different sites using quantitative analysis to identify irreplaceable sites, which we haven't really addressed yet. And to give you an example of how this quantitative set of criteria work, if you have each one of the criteria has a quantitative threshold, so for example, if you are looking at a specific species that is threatened with a particular threat level, you will need a certain proportion of the global population of that species to trigger a key biodiversity area. And so under criterion B, you might need 10% of the global population present at one site to be a key biodiversity area. So these are very stringent thresholds and criteria. There won't, most places may not be key biodiversity areas, but up till now we've identified about 1,000 across Canada. And they're very unique and remarkable places with unique and remarkable types of biodiversity. And so why are we doing this? We do have a ton of information already in Canada. There are other tools for pointing us to the places that are really important for biodiversity. But there are 2 opportunities in Canada. First of all, this is one tool that is capturing everything in one place. So it is also quantitative and repeatable. No matter who does the work, you're going to end up with the same set of key biodiversity areas. It is a very clear definition and mandate. It's not, all sites that are important for biodiversity generally, but it's sites to make sure that we're not losing biodiversity. All taxonomic groups and ecosystems are captured in one tool, and we're looking at all systems from freshwater, marine, and terrestrial. So it's a really good tool. That's one thing. But the other part of it is that we have this process. So it's a tool, but it's being applied in a way in Canada that we think is going to lead to very significant outcomes. And the way that it's going to be applied is not just in sort of related to our commitment on protected areas, but it's also useful to feed right into land use planning, land use planning, stewardship, Indigenous-led conservation, and a whole set of other community stewardship. It's an information layer that does not come with any prescribed management, so it can be used in a variety of ways that is most appropriate for a particular context. And so I should note that we're finding key biodiversity areas in wild places, in places that maybe have fewer people there, but also in agricultural areas, in urban areas, in roadside ditches, anywhere where you have biodiversity hanging on by a thread, or that is just a remarkable aggregation or collection of biodiversity. This is part of what is leading to excitement about this tool. The Key Biodiversity Area Coalition is a national group made up of all the major NGOs in Canada. There's a subset of those that are involved in the steering committee that meets once a month to make sure that the process is credible, legitimate, being applied in a really consistent way. And then the KBA Secretariat uniquely is distributed amongst 3 organizations, WCS Canada, Birds Canada, and NatureServe Canada. And we all play a really important role coordinating the work and making sure that it's done to the highest quality. There are many other people involved in the process, however. There are over 1,000 people who've engaged as scientists, as experts, as advisors, as people telling us, who we should talk to, who we should involve, and that's where the strength of the process lies as well. So our approach is very collaborative. We have put a lot of effort into outreach, and partially this is to make sure that the results are used effectively as well. We've involved all types of knowledge, so all forms of knowledge are appropriate to this process. And then there's an extensive review process. So we involve a lot of people in the identification of key biodiversity areas, but we also involve a lot of people in the technical review. So these are mostly species and site experts, but then also in what we call a general review. So we reach out to stakeholders, rights holders, governments to make sure that they're aware that this key biodiversity area has been identified and to offer an opportunity to talk about the site, provide feedback, provide additional information, or sometimes pause and say we've maybe missed some things or there's some important other values that we should at least talk about when we're talking about particular key biodiversity areas. The work is also very comprehensive. So as I mentioned before, we have about 1,000 key biodiversity areas that are in progress of being identified. This is for different types of species criteria, so that includes endangered species, but also rare or endemic species or species aggregations, but then also rare and threatened ecosystems and these sites with the highest ecological integrity in the world, which Canada will have a lot of those. Many countries will not have any, so that makes Canada very unique when it comes to these key biodiversity areas. And then finally, this collaborative process is meant to be as relevant as possible. So we're working on a regional basis. We have coordinators in all the provinces and territories, which is where a lot of the jurisdiction actually lies. And we're learning from people in those particular areas who understand their conservation context best, understand what's available in terms of data and expertise, and making sure that we're building on that knowledge and not going in there and inserting ourselves as a new player. We really want to start with the people who are working in those areas. I won't focus on this slide too much, but I just wanted to let people know that there are a lot of stages and there's a lot of reporting, and the proposals are very long, and there's a lot of information that needs to be collected. So the regional coordinators who are working across Canada are responsible for scoping out where might these key biodiversity areas be, collecting the information, figuring out who are the experts, where might KBAs be identified across Canada. And at that stage, once we're pretty clear that there should be a KBA there, that's when we're able to invite people in. So it's not the type of tool where we can kind of go to communities and say, where are your key biodiversity areas? We need to start with that global standard. But as soon as we have an indication that there's something there, or someone can suggest, can you scope this out, we're able to go in and say, okay, yes, it probably meets criteria. We need to gather and discuss this and assess the actual site. So the work is slow and it's additive. There's many opportunities to provide information, to input information, and add knowledge. And we don't want to leave anyone behind. So this is where we're at now. We have, it says 946, but that's only because there's one higher up off the map that's not actually there being counted on the map. So there's 947 key biodiversity areas in progress. We have some people who are going to talk about some of these in detail. Maybe a little less than half of these were actually important bird and biodiversity areas that are being reassessed as key biodiversity areas. And that's work that was led by Birds Canada over the past couple of decades. But now we have 599 unique species that are leading to key biodiversity areas. You can see that, you probably can't see the taxonomic breakdown, but we have key biodiversity areas for everything from mammals and birds, but also slugs and lichens. And these are some of the species that can actually capture your imagination, and we hope will be inspiring to Canadians everywhere when they realize, oh, Canada has full responsibility for this little blue slug that only is found here in southern British Columbia, for example. And so that's the kind of information and responsibility that we want to see taken by Canadians. This is really only capturing the species, key biodiversity areas. We're working hard on the ecosystem KBAs, but there's a lot of science that needs to be done before we're able to actually delineate those sites. So we're on our way with the ecosystem ones as well. And so here are some of the special creatures that we're able to capture beyond the iconic species that are often the focus of Canadian conservation that international groups would likely know about, polar bears and caribou and things like that. We actually have, these are all endemic species in Canada. We're also, as I mentioned before, we have huge extents of threatened native ecosystems. So some of our grasslands in the prairie provinces are some of the most threatened ecosystems in the entire world and have been converted at an astonishingly rapid rate. And we want to make sure that we identify the last intact ecosystems and make sure that they're stewarded appropriately, with partners, obviously. And I just wanted to give you two examples of some of the key biodiversity areas that have gone through the process. This is a very special one, Atlantic National Park, where it will qualify as a key biodiversity area at the global scale for aggregations of caribou, so their birthing grounds are captured in this KBA, along with a lot of rare plants found there. So this one's in a national park, but this one is in the middle of a sea of agriculture in the Sydenham River in Ontario. So just to show the diversity of sites that we're actually being able to capture. There's three, we've added a fourth mollusk, and these are mollusks that are just hanging on by a thread in this very intensive agricultural region, and this is one of the only places in the world where these mollusks are found. So as a total kind of collection of key biodiversity areas, we expect that we're going to cover about 10% of Canada with key biodiversity areas. And this includes the scoped, the draft, and approved KBAs to date. The gray area are the scoped sites for high ecological integrity, and so we're not actually going to have a giant KBA that covers all of northern Canada. We have to choose two large key biodiversity areas per ecoregion. And we have a team of scientists across the country who have been working to scope these sites, and then we'll have a participatory process with largely Indigenous communities as well as regional scientists to figure out where those sites with the highest ecological integrity lie. So a few next steps. I'm going to skip over that one. I'm not sure where these came from. So I just wanted to mention a few key outcomes of the KBA process. So the KBA identification, so we have the results clearly as the key biodiversity areas themselves, and that spatial information will be shared broadly and publicly available through the KBA registry. But it's not just that, we have much broader outcomes as well. So I'm trying to convince you that this process, again, has been key to the success of this whole initiative, and that will have outcomes in and of itself. The Key Biodiversity Area identification process has been a locus of activity. There have been over 1,000 people, as I mentioned, who've participated in this work, and that number is constantly growing. We'll be in our thousands within the next year or two. The results of having an open and transparent process is that it's very trusted, and so far, everyone, for the most part, is agreeing to work with us. And where we need to pause or stop or listen to people's concerns about jurisdiction over land, there's no management implications of identifying the key biodiversity area. It just tells you where a remarkable site is, but that doesn't mean that a push to protect or steward those sites might not occur in the future. So where there are concerns about that, we stop and we listen and we have discussions about that. And there's a role so far for governments, NGOs, Indigenous communities, academics. Everybody's been doing something different in a pretty flexible and open way. The process has also catalyzed data and knowledge gathering and use. So Chloe and Patrick are going to talk about that in more detail, so I won't pause on that. But there's been a ton of new science also being generated by this process, both on measurements of ecological integrity at large scales, for example, publication of new road networks for Canada that include much more vast networks of roads that have not been included in available data sets previously. And I could go on. We also have many students, interns, PhD students, postdocs working on this project as well. So it's a pretty exciting and broad thing, and it's a place for anyone. Anyone wants to talk to me about it. I didn't even introduce myself, but I'm Kira Retzefern. I'm the director of the Key Biodiversity Area Initiative at WCS Canada, and I do welcome you to talk to me afterwards if you're interested in more of the details. And then the outcome of this process is that end users are ready for the update. So most of our big project partners have been waiting for the results. Olaf and Triple C has been looking for maps for a few years now, and we're able to now supply them. And but also, the land trusts want to use key biodiversity areas to focus where they can purchase land, where investments into biodiversity conservation should occur as a priority. So this is how information is. The information is going to be used and is already being used in some cases. Okay, so I'm going to get the next people to come up in a minute, but first, in between talks, we wanted to show you some videos from our partners across Canada, because only the people who are close to Montreal were able to come to this meeting, but we have many people who wanted to say something about KBAs.
My name is Ann Forshner, and I work with Parks Canada studying species at risk in Banff, Yoho, and Kootenay National Parks. Castlegarry Cave has been nominated as a key biodiversity area in Canada on account of a globally rare species called Stygobromus canadensis that is found within. This tiny cave-dwelling organism is only found in Castlegarry Cave and nowhere else on the planet. Castlegarry Cave itself is a unique environment. Part of the cave extends underneath the glaciers that form the Columbia ice fields. And while there is much research into glaciers, cave ecology in this part of North America is poorly understood. Parks Canada is committed to protecting biodiversity in collaboration with Indigenous partners, stakeholders, and other agencies. So I'm excited about this nomination. And I feel it gives Parks Canada the opportunity to shine a spotlight on this special cave, a stunning and under-recognized environment with unique species found within.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Gabriel Bergeron et j'ai travaillé comme un professionnel de recherche à l'Université de Sherbrooke pour l'initiative des zones clés pour la biodiversité. Pendant mon travail, j'ai aidé à identifier plus de 90 KBA potentiels pour le Québec. Aujourd'hui, je me situe dans la région des Montagnes Vertes en Estrie, qui est une région qui a été identifiée comme un site potentiel à cause de la grande biodiversité, tant au niveau des amphibiens, avec des espèces comme la salamandre pourpre, qu'au niveau des plantes, avec des espèces comme la diante des Montagnes Vertes et la stère à rameaux établis. On trouve aussi plusieurs sites importants pour les chaussures. Ce site-là en Estrie, dans le sud du Québec, est important parce que la région a subi une forte pression humaine, mais les Montagnes Vertes, ça représente encore aujourd'hui un des grands massifs forestiers de l'Est de l'Amérique du Nord. Donc, c'est un site qui a un haut potentiel pour la collectivité, mais aussi pour sa richesse d'espèces et sa haute biodiversité.
Thanks for that. So next, we're going to have two speakers, Chloe Devisé, who is the technical coordinator at KBA at WCS Canada, and Patrick Henry, who's the executive director of NatureServe Canada, and they're going to talk about the data and organization side of it.
Thanks, Kira. And clearly I'm very keen to get on
and start presenting. So Patrick and I are going to present, as Kira mentioned, how the initiative has really acted as a catalyzer for the assemblage of the organization of biodiversity data in Canada. And first, I want to lay out a little bit the kind of data challenge that we had with this initiative. And so thinking back to the various characteristics of the program that Kira just laid out, so its scope, its collaborative nature, what did that mean? What were the implications of those program characteristics in terms of data? Thinking first about scope, you heard Kira mention that this was really a program that looks at all taxonomic groups. That means we had to gather data for all taxonomic groups, as well as all systems, so freshwater, marine, terrestrial, and all Canadian jurisdictions. And in fact, oftentimes we even had to collect data, or to gather data rather, outside of Canada to get a sense of the global range of species, which is important to get a sense of whether or not they meet KBA thresholds. So a huge scope in terms of data gathering. The other aspect of the project that was really an important challenge in terms of data was its collaborative nature. We're looking at many, many participants in the work. So if you think back to Kira's first graphic showing the KBA coalition and all the various participants, we're also producing a variety of data products beyond just KBAs themselves. And we have a very diverse set of end users who need to access this information. So this is the layout of the challenge we had, and we're going to start today by talking about the scope a little bit and addressing what did we do to gather data across all these different, so all taxonomic groups, systems, and jurisdictions. Then we'll lay out the actual infrastructure we set up in order to have many participants involved in the work and also to be able to serve the data to various end users. And we'll finish by showing a little bit the various data products that we've produced beyond the KBAs themselves as well.
Great, thank you. So just before I get started, in terms of giving you a sense of the data mining, management, sharing work that NatureServe Canada leads for the KBA project, I just want to confirm, there's also bird data that is led by Birds Canada. So when I'm talking about species data here, Birds Canada's got the lead on birds data. Ecosystem information data, Stephen Lilly, who was up in the podium here more recently, and colleagues from NatureServe in the US and other ecosystem experts lead on that. We also are involved in that aspect. Those are the leaders for those subsets of data. So if you look up on this, the slide here, you've got a graphic showing some of the data sources, the groups that we target for our collection of species data, which we manage in the KBA project database and make available to KBA experts, so that when there are KBA workshops, the data's there, it's been cleaned, it's quality checked, and ready to go for that KBA analyses. To date, we've mined, gathered data from approximately 170 data sources. Everything from academia, museums, community science such as iNaturalist, online platforms like GBIF and so on, literature. NatureServe network data plays an important role in this, so the provincial, territorial, and state conservation data centers that are usually housed in provincial, territorial, state governments in Canada and the United States. And through that work, we've collected about 16 million data records, mostly from Canada, USA, Mexico, but with some other jurisdictions represented for some KBA work. Data cleaning, duplicate removal, finding and removing bad data, that is a massive part of our work effort, and learning new approaches on how to do that efficiently. Whack-a-mole, and whoa, the data came back with the latest import data refresh, so we're trying to build systems to eliminate that problem of duplicates, bad data, etc. We're having some successes, but always learning. Data refreshes about once a year, and also based on KBA workshop requirements. Is there a KBA workshop coming up? Let's do some data mining, ensure that we have the latest and greatest data for that. Big, lot of work. Data license agreements, data sharing agreements. it's mostly for the really important data, the subset 3% of the data that is, sensitive species records, restricted data, and so on. But it's so important for this work. We spend a lot of time bringing together partners and developing data license agreements and so on for that work.
So the data assemblage has really been led by NatureServe Canada, as Patrick just explained, and then both of our organizations, as well as Canada, have been working to actually implement the data infrastructure that enables us to all collaborate on this data. And so first and foremost, we needed to make sure that everyone who needs to participate in the work could have access to the data that Patrick just described. And so those are, of course, the three organizations that make up the Canadian KBA sector. It's the Birds Canada, NatureServe Canada, WCS Canada, as well as the regional coordinators and the thematic coordinators who actually conduct the work of KBA identification, the academic partners, as well as the reviewers Kira mentioned, so subject matter experts, site stakeholders, rights holders, and interested parties. So we needed a system that enabled all of these different people to participate in the work in a way that was efficient, secure, and consistent. And of course, we also needed a way to serve then the data to our diverse end users. So the members of the KBA Coalition, Indigenous communities, government agencies, industry, NGOs, academic partners, and really just all Canadians, the general public. So how did we do that? All the data that Patrick just described that NatureServe Canada led the gathering of is hosted in this database that we call the Internal KBA Workspace and Database. It's a Postgres, PostGIS, Esri Enterprise database. It's hosted on an ArcGIS server, and we access it through ArcGIS Pro, and a variety of custom applications as well. We've then implemented a set of essentially different levels of access based on what level of access different users needed to the data, as well as different permissions based on our data use agreements that Patrick mentioned. So in the inner core, we have the KBA Canada Secretariat that has direct access to the database, as well as our KBA coordinators and academic partners who also have direct access to the database, who are less complete access based on data permissions. We also have our reviewers who don't access the database directly, but they access a set of apps that give them essentially the ability to comment on the KBA process, to review the KBA process as it unfolds, without actually having to enter the database itself. And so those are all subject matter experts, site stakeholders, Indigenous communities, rights holders, etc. And so this is really on the participation front of the data infrastructure. And this entire process is really co-managed between WCS Canada and NatureServe Canada, this database. Then we need to serve the data to end users. And what we've done here is we actually have a separate database that is now managed by Birds Canada that we call the KBA Registry. And that's the back end to our KBA website. We send the data from the internal database to the KBA Registry, only the final data products, so not everything, just the final sites, the final information, once it's being vetted for public sharing. The registry then serves the data to everyone who's interested, and you can access it through our website, kbacanada.org. We also have a really interesting linkage with NatureServe Explorer Pro. So that is the new platform for NatureServe to share spatial data with the public and also just with partners. And so what you're seeing here is that we send the information that Patrick described that the project has been gathering is going to be sent as permitted to NatureServe Explorer Pro to also just be more widely available to be used in conservation projects throughout Canada. And we also have linkages between NatureServe Explorer Pro and the registry that enable users to navigate from one platform to the other. If they want more information about sites or more information about species within them, they can navigate between two. So it really is a wholly integrated infrastructure, and it's all coordinated by the Canadian KBA Secretariat. The idea being to ensure that the work is done in a consistent way and that everyone has access to the information as needed. We have a variety of data products that are coming out of this project that are leveraging this infrastructure. The KBAs themselves, of course, are among those. So the site delineations, as well as a whole host of quantitative and qualitative information about the KBA sites themselves, and the tracking of KBA trigger species and ecosystems within the sites. Beyond KBA products, we also have whole suite of other information and research and products that have come out of this project and that this infrastructure group has really enabled us to develop. Pierre's already mentioned a few. There's habitat suitability models that we've been developing with academic partners, area of occupancy maps, ecosystem-based automated range maps. Pierre mentioned a new national road data set showing much more comprehensively where roads are in Canada. We've also helped develop some new ecological integrity indicators at a national scale, contributed to a consistent ecosystem classification throughout Canada, and really this list continues to grow. So we're constantly adding new data products. And I'm going to let Patrick wrap up by explaining one of the most exciting of these data products, which is ecosystem-based automated range maps.
So yeah, at the start of the project, I remember just when you came to the NatureServe Canada AGM, we caught wind of the ecosystem-based automated range maps. We hadn't really started the project, and we said, that would be fantastic for the KBA project, having standardized national global range maps that would inform KBA delineation, let alone for important species in Canada, coastal species, etc., that don't fall into that category. And through the partnership, we worked together to make it happen. It's fantastic. I'll very quickly go over some of the concepts, but take a look at the website. There are people who know this information better than me, and the information on the website is very well documented. In summary, you can see in the graphic ecosystem shapes that have been lit up with either present, there's data that has been collected in the last 40 years showing species as present, or historical, there is data that has been collected showing that there's a species documented there over 40 years ago, or presence expected that is based on expertise, so science experts, species experts, or high quality range maps or species distribution models. There's confidence that the species is present in that ecoshape. So the ecosapes get lit up, and then on we go to refine them. Very quickly, the process for EBAR development and refinement. On the left, this is for Swift Fox. We've got data that was mined for Canada, USA, Mexico. It's plotted onto the map. In the middle column, auto-generated, some Python scripts are going to populate those eco-shapes based on that data and light up those eco-shapes. Off to the right, you see the expert reviewed. What we do is we load these maps, these auto-generated EBAR range maps, into an online review tool where experts can refine those maps to improve them and to add their information into the database to explain their choices. Quick look at the expert review tool online. I'd say some of the most interesting aspects of this is the ability for the experts to document their choices, to add reference information, so it serves as a database. This is accessible to KBA experts, the public who have the GIS data packages, which are available for free. And then also the fact that the expert review has the same weight as data. So if you are, traditionally ecological knowledge community, well, we have that type of opportunity to contribute to the refinement of these maps without having data that you manage is fantastic. Just a quick summary of some of the EBAR accomplishments since 2019. Very quickly, because I know for time, we're at about 16,000 downloads just on the NatureServe Canada website. There's an Esri page, there's Esri Living Atlas where we're offering it up, NatureServe Explorer Pro, so we're not counting everything. Please do visit the website to learn more and reach out. Okay, that's my slide. So, first off, we've learned a few things along the way with the data collection organization. One is exciting in terms of the cash funding that has been brought to this project. We have, the actual match of in-kind contributions of data and expertise that we've gone into detail. It's phenomenal. It makes applying for funding easier and to make funders of cash funders excited. Data gaps still a problem. We've got a big country, a lot of data gaps up in the north, lesser known species. There's promise, for the future in terms of, for example, a Canada Biodiversity Observation Network. Let's pool our resources, use new technologies such as remote sensing, but that's going to take time. Data sharing restrictions continue to be a challenge, but We do have a lot of trust with the partnership, and we've found ways to put together data license agreements that I think are working. A whole suite of new tools. That fourth bullet there, I'm going to skip that. We've covered that nicely. And then just the importance of cross-institutional collaboration, which the pooling of resources, capacity, expertise has led to incredible outcomes, let alone, I would say, a herd mentality of success where, people on the outside are going, what's going on there? We better get on board. There's a lot of important work being done, and I think that's the stage we're at, and hopefully we can maintain that. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Maria Lang. I have been involved in the KBA program since 2018, mainly focused on identifying KBAs in northern Canada. Winter has really set in here, but there is a place nearby in the traditional territory of the Taku River Tlingit where the northern winter never fully takes hold.
These warm springs are situated close to Atlan Lake where the spring's waters eventually flow. The warm water and tufa deposits support an unusual array of species for this latitude, including plants in a unique population of lake chub that has little tolerance for cold water typical of the north. Potentially disruptive species have been recently introduced. Exotic cherry shrimp are common, and watercress is now the dominant aquatic plant. By designating this place a Key Biodiversity Area and highlighting its special features, my hope is that more people will value and invest in the conservation of this unique ecosystem.
My name is Robin Roney, and I'm the Ontario Key Biodiversity Area Regional Coordinator with Wildlife Conservation Society, or WCS Canada. I'm here today at the Severn River in Ontario, which is a section of the Trent Severn Canal near Georgian Bay. There's a naturally rare plant called Engelmann's quillwort growing in the water here. Engelmann's quillwort is a fern ally, meaning that the species produces spores rather than seeds. We are working to designate a section of the Severn River as a national key biodiversity area due to this site holding over 60% of the species' national population. It's important for me to nominate key biodiversity areas, such as the Severn River, because I believe that we need to draw attention to these sites that are crucial to the survival of rare and at-risk species. Key biodiversity area designations can then help us focus on preventing the loss of special species like Engelmann's quillwort from Canada.
Thanks, Chloe and Patrick. And next I'm going to ask Andrew Couturier to come up and talk about the important bird and biodiversity areas work that was the foundation of a lot of the key biodiversity area work in Canada. Andrew is the Senior Director for Landscape Science and Conservation at Birds Canada.
It's the big button. Okay, thanks for that introduction. And before I get started, I just want to acknowledge and thank my fellow speakers and members of the KBA Canada Secretariat. It's truly a pleasure working with this amazing team, getting this job done. So thank you very much. Okay, my job today is to tell you a little bit of the backstory about important bird and biodiversity areas. It's been mentioned a couple of times now in the talks as the precursor to the KBAs, really. This is an old slide, but the number's a bit higher, I believe. Basically, there's a 40-year plus history of the Important Bird and Biodiversity Areas program globally, and it. If you look on the world database of KBAs at the moment, you'll notice a lot of these polygons will be there. About 75% or so of the KBAs that have been identified so far around the world are actually former IBAs that have been moved over, and they need ratification, they need updating, and so on. But that's where that map comes from. And you can see on here that the work has gone on in some 200 countries around the world over 40, 50 years or so. And you can see Canada circled up there. We've been at it since about 1996, working on this program. And in that time, we've identified roughly 600 sites across the country based on some of the similar types of criteria that Kira mentioned in the opening. Places where birds tend to congregate, places where species at risk occur, either listed globally by the IUCN or by our national listing process through the CIWIC. Approximately 200 of our sites of the 600 have some form of protection. And yes, it's a 25-year plus history, millions of dollars invested in these areas already. We have enjoyed some success in policy making with the IBA program, specifically around wind energy and other types of environmental assessments. IBAs are recognized as one of the environmental or biological values that should be checked before development projects are approved. We know from analysis that IBAs have always been more than just birds, and we've done some background analysis to support the fact that these sites do overlap strongly with other types of biodiversity. And so this was kind of a precursor analysis to looking at KBAs, the full picture of biodiversity in Canada. And importantly, we also have a network of what we call site caretakers or stewards working at these places across the country. So we have a good foundation really to help drive forward this larger process of KBA identification in Canada, bring these stewards along and have them working on more than just birds. And people are starting to get excited about this. So there were some challenges with the IBA program. Tough slog to achieve protection at these places. Never quite got into the full, they were never quite fully embraced in terms of decision making the way that we hoped that they would be. And so some of the collaborative approaches that Kira mentioned in the opening there, we really think are going to solve the problems that we had with IBAs, and those problems won't exist with KBAs because they have this collaborative buy-in, grassroots kind of support right from the get-go. And so we're really excited that KBAs are going to lead the way here. And the other aspect that was a bit challenging was that these were very bird-centric areas based on bird criteria, and so it was hard to engage with the wider conservation public on these places because they were very focused on birds, and birders love them, but not necessarily everyone knew about them and cared about them as much as the birding bird. So again, this is a way that KBAs, with an all-taxon approach, can really widen the tent, conservation tent that is, and bring more people together to care about these places. So one piece of this KBA Canada puzzle is to look at IBAs and to try and determine which ones of them will meet the new KBA criteria. So the criteria are quite similar, but there are some differences. And so my team was tasked with evaluating all of our IBAs to see which ones would qualify as KBAs. And so fortunately, we have a very large database of bird records that we are able to draw on. So far, we've looked at 21 million records in our database, and this is through things like eBird and provincial breeding bird atlases, Christmas bird count, any type of bird monitoring that has gone on that we have access to is in this Nature Counts database. And so we've developed script-like approaches to automatically harvest that data, compare it to the KBA criteria, and flag, which IBAs seem to meet criteria, which ones maybe could meet KBA criteria rather, if they had more frequent records or new information. So these numbers aren't accurate; these change by the day. But at the time this slide was put together, we figured that about 270 or so of the former IBAs will meet KBA criteria at the global level. Another, I can't read the number from here, 150 or so at the national level. But we do recognize that a lot of these places could be, or they are, data deficient. So Patrick mentioned this in his remarks. We have this challenge with remote sites, places that haven't really been visited. In many years, we don't have up-to-date information. That's part of our job is chasing down new sources of information so that we can actually move these from data deficient to sufficiently assessed areas and bring them along as KBAs. So a pretty big challenge there. And so far, we have about 150 sites that don't seem to meet any criteria at this time. They could blink on at any time when you get new information, but at the moment, they don't seem to meet any criteria. So that's something we're constantly looking at and trying to improve on. So lessons learned from this analysis so far. The participatory approach is extremely important. So this collaborative work that was touched on in the opening, very important to getting this buy-in off the ground right from the get-go. The national standard, very important in making this approach relevant within the Canadian conservation context. So there's a global standard, of course. We heard about the national standard that was developed through this process. Very important to have that happen to make it relevant to the Canadian context. Without that, we wouldn't have the buy-in that we need. And speaking of buy-in, yes, buy-in from government and partners, communities, very important right from the start. Doesn't look good when you go through a whole process and then spring it on people at the end and say, here's something you should use, right? So it's better to get people on board right from the beginning. And that's what we try to do and are doing. It turns out it's not so easy to confirm IBAs as KBAs. As I mentioned, a lot of remote sites, old data, populations have shifted, moved, population trends have occurred that maybe some sites are no longer going to be IBAs or KBAs anymore, and so a big challenge dealing with that information. Local champions are key. So as with the IBAs, we really do want to get local champions involved and invested in these areas so that they care from the ground up and they can be advocates, they can do monitoring, they can do conservation work. Really critical to get people on board right from the get-go. And we're trying to bring along our IBA caretakers over to this new system, looking at all taxa. And speaking of all taxa, yes, a very compelling approach that makes it more interesting to more people, more donors, more communities, governments, etc. It's not just going to be a bird thing anymore. It's a much broader tent, more powerful. It's a conservation currency around the world, so that a KBA in Canada means the same thing as a KBA in Australia or Africa or wherever it may be. It's a very powerful approach. And again, this has come up a few times in the previous slides, but it's worth a big plug here. There is a new KBA Canada website as of 2 months ago that we launched in Ottawa. It was great having the Minister of the Environment present for that, and we had a bit of a celebration there. So I would encourage you all to go on the website to see, what has transpired so far and what the plans are. A lot of KBAs in the queue being evaluated now. A lot of hard work going on behind the scenes, but for now you can see those in progress KBAs as well. But on this site you can see the approved KBAs, the ones that have gone through all the rigorous process that Kira mentioned at the beginning, and are now publicly accessible. You can query the data in all kinds of cool ways, by taxa, by criteria, by geography. Lots of really interesting ways that we can query the data and download the data to use in applications right now. And I will close with that.
Bonjour, je me nomme Catherine Monticone. Je travaille pour Conservation de la Nature Canada, région du Québec, qui est un organisme non gouvernemental qui protège au Québec près de 50 000 hectares de milieux naturels d'intérêt pour faire face à la double crise du climat et de la perte de la biodiversité. Conservation de la Nature Canada est fière de contribuer à l'identification de nouvelles zones clés pour la biodiversité, également nommées KBA. D'ailleurs, je me trouve présentement dans les Laurentides, à proximité d'un site potentiel pour la tortue des bois et également à proximité d'un autre site potentiel pour la carmentine d'Amérique et l'esturgeon jaune. Les KBA apportent de l'information complémentaire aux données scientifiques déjà existantes, ce qui nous permet d'assurer que l'on concentre nos efforts de conservation de la nature au bon endroit.
And I am the Research and Education Coordinator here at Small Lake System Nature Sanctuary. As a UN Convention on Biological Diversity's COP15 is coming up on December 7th, we wanted to emphasize the importance of key biodiversity designations and ensuring the persistence of ecologically significant areas such as the Gary Oak Meadow here in Christmas Hill. Identifying Christmas Hill as a key biodiversity area helps us to make distinctions between critically important habitat for rare and endangered plants and animals.
This designation will help us to be acknowledged by governments, the local community, urban planners, and funders. Gary Oak ecosystems support the highest diversity of plants in coastal BC. However, this biodiversity is threatened, and currently 25 plant, 6 invertebrate, and 6 vertebrate species are considered at risk in this habitat. Christmas Hill is home to 250 plant species, with 8 species at risk. Some of the threatened or sensitive plants and animals on Christmas Hill include olive-sided flycatchers, purple martins, banded gourd moss, tall woolly heads, and yellow montane violet. Today, less than 3% of Gary Oak Meadow in Canada remains. The opportunity for community to protect nature on site is expanding through increased capacity with new funding sources and programming that are specifically designed to train community in stewardship. For example, this summer, the Habitat Stewardship Project has been approved for funding of $135,000 by Environment and Climate Change Canada. The Christmas Hill grant will also go towards centering Indigenous leadership in the stewardship of this land.
We see First Nations collaborations, ongoing conservation, community-led stewardship, and KBA designations working in tandem to create a vital hub of one of Victoria's most accessible green community spaces.
So we're going to have Peter Shorey talk next. He's the Outreach and Assessment Coordinator at WCS Canada for KBAs. I should also just say that he's put together these videos and reached out to all our partners to put them together, so we want to thank him very much for that too. Thrilled to see those.
Thank you, Kira. Thank you to my co-panelists today and everybody else for joining. I'm going to jump right in and talk about some of our approaches to Indigenous collaborations around KBAs across the country. And I'm going to apologize in advance if I seem to spin through some of this. I just want to leave some time for questions at the end. But I'd love to chat more about all of this with anybody afterwards. I want to start by saying that there's a real need to involve Indigenous collaborators around the KBA program, around all the KBAs in the country. As was mentioned at the start, all of the sites that we're identifying across the country are on Indigenous territories. And so it's really important for us to make sure that we're involving these nations and communities around all of the sites that we're scoping out. Indigenous-led conservation is a necessary and really effective way of halting and reversing biodiversity loss and climate change, as much in Canada as elsewhere in the world. So this is a big responsibility, I think, that we have with the KBA Canada program. It's also a really cool opportunity. As much as we have thousands of KBAs to identify and collaborate around, and as much as there are hundreds of different Indigenous peoples and nations across Canada, and this is challenging, it's also a really spectacular opportunity. Like was mentioned by some of my co-panelists into that there, not only as we identify new sites for mammals, for insects, for fish and other species, and including kind of the fullest picture of knowledge and Indigenous perspectives and relationships where it's appropriate in KBA materials around those sites and species. It's also a really spectacular opportunity as we go back to IBAs, which are decades old and didn't have a lot of outreach around them at the time, now to reopen these sites and look at these sites with fresh eyes, involving people around them and Indigenous nations and communities around these sites. So a really big challenge that we have, but a really special opportunity and one that we really need to take advantage of. It was mentioned at the very start, KBAs are a very specific tool, and this is really important to keep in mind. KBAs are identifying sites that are really critical for the persistence of species and ecosystems, and identifying those places that if we lose, we would be in danger of losing really critical pieces of our nature. But this is very specific, and when we think about overlaps and collaborations with Indigenous partners and communities and what their priorities might be, it's important to keep in mind that KBAs don't explicitly account for biocultural values or Indigenous perspectives very well. And so there's sometimes a gap between the species and the sites that KBA criteria highlight, and the species and sites that Indigenous communities have really strong relationships with and consider very significant. On the other hand, and on the flip side of that, there's often a lot of overlap between these sites. We look at species like American ginseng on the slide here, sites like polar bear, American eel, and others. And a lot of these species that the KBA criteria are identifying are, through no coincidence, spectacularly important and large cultural significance to different Indigenous peoples across the country. And so there's a really great opportunity as we collaborate, as we reach out, to include some of this knowledge, which some is known, a lot of it is not. And so where it's appropriate, we can highlight this, work with communities and work with nations to share this information more broadly, to incorporate Indigenous place names as the names of KBAs, and highlight some of the, not only the biodiversity and the really numerical scientific information of KBAs, but highlight the stories around the sites, the history of caretaking and stewardship, and the relationships around those places. So, where these overlaps occur, a really great opportunity. I wanted to show some of these overlaps across the country here. What we're seeing in yellow and red is some of the KBAs in draft form. So these boundaries are open to change. A lot of them are IBAs, and you'll recognize them from the map that Andrew showed just a moment ago. The other sites on this map, the purple and blue dots across the country, are sites either for establishing Indigenous protected and conserved areas or establishing community-based monitoring programs, or in Canada here, Indigenous guardian programs. This is not a comprehensive overview of these Indigenous-led conservation projects. This is only the data that we were able to kind of systematically pull from federal databases and put on a map. But already just with this subset of these projects, you can see, if you squint, a lot of overlap between where these projects are underway and where we're starting to scope out these KBAs across the country. So a lot of potential for collaboration and for collaborations here. And a lot of reason to collaborate as well. I'm summarizing here some of the things that we've heard both from one-on-one conversations with nations and Indigenous experts, also lessons that we've heard from a series of national workshops that we had in this spring with nations and representatives of Indigenous communities from across the country to tell us what they thought about KBAs and where they saw the challenges and the benefits of this tool being. And one of the things that appeared again and again, I'm not going to highlight everything on the slide here because some of it's been touched on, but one of the things that we hear again and again from communities is the attractiveness of KBAs being an internationally recognized and standardized designation. KBAs are seen as something separate from the federal or provincial designations, and so a lot of nations and communities we're finding are very excited to have this kind of independent and very scientifically credible tool that's highlighting sites within their territories and producing information that they can point others towards. To a lot of communities, most communities know already the value of these sites, and so here we're able to formalize some of that information and collaborate with communities to make sure that it's highlighting, KBA information is highlighting what they want to share. This has been touched on as well, but KBA information can be used in a variety of different ways. Formalizing that information, like I just mentioned, and putting it in a package that can be shared easily for, from communities to other groups that they want to make aware of the importance of sites around their territories. KBAs can feed into proposals for things like Indigenous protected and conserved areas, and feed into proposals for getting funding for things like community-based monitoring programs and other caretaking and stewardship opportunities. So a lot of flexibility with this KBA tool. The fact that it's just information means it can be used in a lot of different ways, or it can be completely ignored. So there's also a little risk to communities in a lot of cases for collaborating on KBAs where there's interest. I'm not going to step through all these points so we can have some more time for questions at the end, but I wanted to highlight with this the different ways that Indigenous perspectives and collaborations are happening across the KBA program to date. A lot of work both at the national level of the program in terms of getting guidance from Indigenous experts and different leaders into how the KBA program should align with interests, how things like the KBA criteria might intersect with Indigenous conservation, Indigenous-led conservation, and other priorities. This is only one small item, but I think it's maybe the most important in terms of involvement to date. We've had dozens of meetings and conversations with hunters and trappers committees, with chief and councils, with staff from Indigenous, from nations, lands departments, and other individuals. So a lot of discussion and a lot of interaction and participation in the KBAs to date, which is incredibly exciting. Again, I'm not going to step through all of these lessons here, but I'm happy to chat more about it after. I think the most important lesson that I want to highlight is the need to keep timelines and processes flexible with the KBAs. Collaboration around KBAs is relationship building, is making sure that communities have time to in the midst of all of the other engagement and consultation that's ongoing across the country and with different nations, making sure that there's appropriate time to learn about KBAs and consider how they might interact with existing goals and stewardship opportunities. So as much as there's a huge interest and excitement for KBA data and producing that as quickly as possible, we're balancing that with the need to keep timelines flexible and make sure that we're proceeding in a process that's truly collaborative and inclusive to everybody in the KBA program. So that's something that we're finding is really important and a difficult balancing act when there's such an urgency for conservation across the country. I wanted to highlight as well a couple of excellent models of collaboration that we've had to date. Two cases in particular are, I think, really exciting and exemplary of what we're trying to do here. In western BC with the Tobacco Plains, the Yaqut First Nation, identifying a KBA in their territory, as soon as the area was scoped out, we were able to reach out to a staff member from the Tobacco Plains First Nation Lands Department and work with them on developing this proposal. Eventually, we were able to bring it to the chief and council of that nation, give a presentation on what the KBAs were, how they might be used, and as a group, the whole chief and council voted to support the KBA process and move forward with that site. So it was a really exciting way to involve the whole, all the chief and council to work with the lands staff from that nation really closely on developing this proposal. And I think that was a great example of collaboration and what we're trying to do across the country here. The other example is something that's emerging, that's happening more and more now in BC and very soon in Ontario as well, but using the KBA identification as a reason and as a way to get funding to communities to bring youth and elders onto the land, onto the waters, and monitoring potential KBAs in candidate areas. With partners in BC, particularly BC Nature, we're able to get funding to these communities to bring people out onto the land to survey, make sure these KBAs are meeting criteria. And that's something that's really exciting that we're finding is drawing a lot of attention and interest. Whether nations are interested in using KBA information or not, I think being able to get on the land is a really tangible outcome, something that is really exciting to see, and hopefully that we continue with a lot more of. I'm going to end on that note, but again, happy to chat more about any and all of this afterwards with anybody who might be interested. Thank you.
I'm Anne Murray, and I'm a Delta naturalist. I'm in the Delta Naturalist Club. I'm one of the caretakers for the Fraser River Estuary, KBA, along with 3 other people. And it is significant for the large number of shorebirds, waterfowl, gulls and raptors that come through on migration at various seasons of the year. A lot of the habitats have been under threat in the past. We're very concerned, for instance, about Roberts Bank area, because there's been so much port development and affect the western sandpiper population that really relies on biofilm in the mud at Brunswick Point. I'm pretty excited about the fact that the Key Biodiversity Area concept is coming here, because it's making us realise more of what we've got beyond birds.
A critically endangered species here in Canada. I think key biodiversity areas are incredibly important, both to protect critically endangered species and nesting sites, and make people appreciate and understand just the sheer beauty of the wildlife they have just in their backyard.
We have one last formal presentation, and then we'll take questions, and we'll hear from Justine Array as well. So let's welcome Kim Gauthier-Camper, who is the KBA coordinator for Quebec, based at the University of Sherbrooke.
Bonjour, bonsoir. I hope you can, I'm going to change a little bit here and present my part in French, but the slides are all in English. Ça fait vraiment plaisir de vous présenter le projet sur la science collaborative à l'échelle régionale pour l'identification des zones clés pour la biodiversité du KBA, Biodiversity Area in Québec. Je vais vous donner un petit peu de contexte ici. La connaissance sur les données de biodiversité au Québec ont grandement augmenté dans les 60 dernières années. Néanmoins, il y a juste 5% des 40 000 espèces estimées sur le territoire qui sont documentées pour le moment. Dans des espèces de corps. Dans les connaissances sur la biodiversité, on voit une très grande différence sur la distribution des connaissances avec une grande différence entre le nord et le sud et dans le type d'espèces documentées. Les aires protégées au Québec sont aussi distribuées de façon très inégale, avec une protection supérieure au nord où les changements climatiques vont être plus rapides, mais une protection vraiment inférieure au sud. Pourtant, c'est au sud où la biodiversité est la plus grande et où il y a le plus d'espèces à statut précaire et de pression de l'eau. Donc, c'est donc dans cette section-là qu'on a commencé à identifier les KBA au Québec. Jusqu'à présent, on a évalué plus de 300 espèces de faune et de flore. On a pu identifier 90 sites, dont 60 pour les plantes et une trentaine pour la faune ou pour une combinaison de différents taxons. On a aussi identifié une majorité de sites au sud, comme je le disais, et on a travaillé pour intégrer des espèces dans 18 ailiers qui sont devenus des cas. Dans ces 90 sites-là qui vont être acceptés au niveau national ou global dans la prochaine année. Ça c'est juste le début du projet. Dans les prochaines années, on veut travailler sur plus de taxons et sur tout le territoire du Québec. Donc on estime justement que ça va nous prendre 12 à 18 mois pour être capable de compléter l'évaluation de toutes les espèces, pour identifier les sites qu'on peut identifier sur la base des critères sur les autres. Initialement, quand on a commencé, on pensait que le travail allait être beaucoup plus rapide. On avait en fait en tête d'utiliser toutes les données sur la biodiversité, de calculer des seuils et puis de ressortir de façon automatique les sites qui correspondaient aux critères communs. Mais la réalité est très différente de ça. C'est vraiment un travail de collaboration qui est nécessaire. On doit creuser les données, aller chercher dans la littérature, puis consulter vraiment beaucoup d'acteurs qui ont des connaissances fines sur les espèces sur le territoire pour être capable de rassembler toute l'information nécessaire pour atteindre les seuils, puis pour répondre aux exigences du standard canadien. On a beaucoup de travail, c'est vraiment un travail de partage de connaissances et de données, de discussion et de co-construction avec les acteurs de tous les secteurs. Et puis, ça, c'est un travail qu'on a fait principalement en réalisant des groupes de travail, des ateliers de partage de connaissances. Quand ça a été possible, on a essayé de d'en faire quelques-uns. Pour l'instant, on en a réalisé deux en personne. Fait que le fait de réaliser des groupes de travail comme ça nous permet de recueillir et de traiter un grand nombre de données, mais aussi de construire un sentiment d'engagement et d'appartenance pour le projet. Et puis tout ça s'est rendu possible, le fait de faire des groupes de travail en personne s'est rendu possible, entre autres, à cause du contexte particulier dans lequel l'initiative au Québec se développe. Donc, contrairement aux autres provinces qui travaillent directement au Wildlife Conservation Society, au Québec, on travaille dans un contexte universitaire. Donc, on est basé à l'Université de Sherbrooke, au laboratoire d'écologie intégrative qui est dirigé par le Migraner. Et puis, dans le laboratoire, il y a plusieurs projets d'envergure qui sont en cours. Ça permet de faciliter la collaboration avec plein de partenaires. Ça donne aussi accès à des ressources financières additionnelles et ça permet de développer plusieurs projets connexes. On travaille entre autres avec BIOS2, qui est un programme de formation en écologie computationnelle. À travers ce programme-là, on a financé des projets de recherche, entre autres, sur la modélisation du futur des KBA dans un contexte de changement climatique, sur le développement de méthodes pour être capable d'identifier des KBA pour les espèces rares ou les plantes. On a aussi travaillé on a aussi fait participer plusieurs étudiants à travers un programme de stage qui ont développé par exemple un outil qui est maintenant utilisé dans le programme national KBA. On travaille aussi avec l'Université Québec qui facilite ça, c'est un projet d'envergure provinciale. Ça permet de faciliter la collaboration et de financer une partie des travaux, entre autres les groupes de travail. Une biodiversité Québec, c'est quoi? C'est un portail qui est développé au labo, mais aussi en collaboration avec le gouvernement du Québec et avec le centre, la science biologique du Québec, pour observer, analyser et partager l'état de la biodiversité au Québec. C'est un projet qui est développé en partenariat avec vraiment beaucoup d'acteurs de différents secteurs, en plus de ceux que je sais, dont Wildlife Conservation Society. En fait, c'est la raison initiale pour laquelle c'est nous qui travaillons sur le projet de quantification du carbone et dans ce domaine. La synergie entre les deux projets est super intéressante. En fait, les KBAs sont des utilisateurs des données qui sont rassemblées dans la Biodiversité Québec et aussi on prend en fait de l'expertise technique qu'il y a dans le projet. Mais le guide Biodiversité Québec va relayer l'information sur les KBA et l'intégrer dans le développement de différents indicateurs sur les lieux sensibles pour la biodiversité et sur l'intégrité écologique. Donc, je veux juste aussi souligner l'importance que c'est vraiment un projet qui est collaboratif, puis tout le monde est invité à contribuer et à participer à cette initiative-là. Donc, n'importe qui, si vous êtes intéressé, vous pouvez me parler à la suite ou me contacter. Et puis, comme mot de la fin, je voulais juste mentionner que je pense que c'est clair que les KBA, c'est un outil rigoureux qui permet de fournir des connaissances fiables sur des zones importantes pour la biodiversité. Et puis, on espère vraiment que cette information-là va être utilisée par les gestionnaires du territoire, les initiatives de conservation pour atteindre les objectifs de 30 par de conservation du territoire. Donc, je tiens à remercier mon équipe parce qu'on travaille vraiment en équipe sur ce projet-là. Et ici, je remercie tous les collaborateurs qui ont donné du temps, de l'énergie et des données et de l'information pour ce projet-là et bien sûr nos partenaires financiers. Merci.
Of course, we always take a little bit longer than we hope to, but we'd love to take any questions that you might have. And I think everybody has a mic, so you can share.
Bonjour. Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Morin. I'm within those walls. I think I'm part of the Canadian delegation, but I also work 4 hours away from here with the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories in Chalk River, Ontario. Andrew, I think we have chatted before on our Team Swift publication. I do have a lot of questions, but I'm trying to prioritize. So I hear a lot about collaboration, the KBA. And by the way, this is a really great first pass for areas of conservation in Canada. So thanks everyone for your work on this. My question is how, so I hear a little bit of collaboration, and of course it requires a lot of collaboration to gather the data and to this type of map. So how is the industry involved in the development of the KBA, either in data sharing or either providing some funding to leverage some other funding? Can you, maybe that's a question for Kira, but
it just works by itself. Thanks for that question. And I would say that it is somewhat of a gap in our project, that we have been reaching out to many, many people, and we started, with the low-hanging fruit. These are people who will for sure collaborate. These are the people we know, and then adding more and more and more, and snowball effect kind of thing. But one group, and maybe Patrick, you might be able to comment on this too in terms of data gathering. It has been suggested many, many times that private industry is a great place for data. They have a lot of data. We're not sure how to access that. And so it is, I think, a gap, and it would be fantastic to learn more, whether if you have input on how to access that kind of data and who to reach out to. One of the things that we are very interested in doing in order to have a greater scope in terms of the people that are involved, because there's millions of people involved, but we certainly haven't reached all sectors, And so one of the things that has just been recently funded by Environment and Climate Change Canada is an end user assessment to systematically go through all the different end users, including industry and the private sector, and figure out who could make use of the information, the results, but also who could, at the same time, who could contribute to it. So I'm not sure if, Patrick, would you like to add to that?
Very quickly, we know that some data comes from industry to the provincial and territorial conservation data centers, including the CDP&Q in Quebec. So I can't quantify that or say what percentage. I'm going to assume that industry doesn't want to share all data, and you can ask for it, and you'll get. You can expect to receive some of it, maybe not others, just like other data holders. Certainly, we could be more proactive, and it's just simply, I think, in terms of relationships, something that would need to be developed.
Hello, I'm representing Biodiversity Plus. It's a network of 36 European countries that join forces as part of the European Biodiversity Strategy. And it could be a good model to roll out these national coordination groups in Europe, but we don't have, or we hardly have any so far. Also, when you see on the map, you hardly see any KBAs in Europe, although we do have a strong network of protected areas, and many, I guess many of these are KBAs. So I just wondered, possibly one of the reasons why we don't have it is because countries think that these KBAs will interfere with existing legal structures and that it will create additional burden and reporting burden. And so I just wondered how we could convince all these countries in Europe to also think about these KBAs, maybe set up these national coordination groups and see the added value. So I don't know if you have any suggestions of where to start.
Hi, I'm Justina Ray. I was going to say something, but really I was just going to be thankful for everything that's happened. But I think that's a great question. KBAs are, as was talked about by Stephen, becoming more and more important as indicators for progress on, sustainable development goals. They're baked into the monitoring framework so far for this to track areas important for biodiversity, if that does come through, hopefully, with Target 3. But there are other targets as well, for example, on ecological integrity in Target 1. So there's lots of impetus for that, but also just the process of collecting the data and bringing it all together and synthesizing it has been kind of a surprise. Like when we started getting into this, and that was so well explained by Chloe and Patrick in particular, we didn't sort of see this benefit at first, but it became really, really clear, both the process of collaboration and then also just all the data that was in fragmented state. And I think if you looked at Europe as a whole, rather than having sort of national coordination groups, Europe as a whole could learn from the Canadian experiences, because we're talking about enormous geography, which also has fragmented jurisdictions. I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges of this effort is how biodiversity data are distributed and how few means there are of being able to coordinate the collection. And this process has allowed that, both the people and the data themselves, in a way that we just did not anticipate. It's been a huge surprise. And I think that could be an impetus in and of itself, even beyond the identification of the KBAs.
Hello, I'm Brittany Anderson. I'm an environmental project coordinator with the Nation of Alberta, and I actually work under the Guardian's funding, and we've been working on an IPCA. So it was repeatedly brought up that a lot of these KBAs are within Indigenous lands or protected areas. Is this not just identifying locations that are already insulated from impacts to some extent? And then to build on that, are there efforts to try to identify locations that maybe aren't under heavy scrutiny, such as Indigenous lands or protected areas? Yeah, but thank you. It was all very fascinating.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a first stab at that. Thank you for the question. Yeah, there are KBAs all over within protected areas and outside as well. It's very much, runs the gamut. There are some KBAs that are very much in protected areas where there's a lot of existing stewardship and caretaking going on. This is in Indigenous territories and Indigenous-led conservation projects, also within IBAs as well, and kind of the decades-long kind of communities that have grown around those sites. But then on the other side of the spectrum, a lot of KBAs are showing up in places that are, if you wouldn't call them degraded, you definitely would not expect to see KBAs there. There are, in the downtown of Victoria, BC, parks where you have, the last populations of some plants holding on. You have other sites in Ontario, Easton and River that Kira showed at the very beginning, rivers where that are running through fragmented landscapes in between agricultural fields and other plots of industry, and you have kind of within these rivers the last of several mussel species and kind of freshwater species that are there. So it really runs the gamut. And as much as it might be good to prioritize one set of species, one set of KBAs, and kind of identify these ones that are in less protected habitats, I think what we're doing right now is just working wherever we can and wherever there's people who are interested in helping build these proposals and they can get them fastest. That's the sites that we're proposing at the moment.
Just to say that our goal is to identify all of them. Yeah. We're agnostic of where they are. I think we actually have to finish up now. We're getting a couple of signals that are strong. But we'd all love to talk with you. I just want to also acknowledge Justina Ray, who is the Chief Scientist and founder of WCS Canada, who was also involved in the development of the KBA standard at the global scale, and one of the people with Stephen Woodley who brought this tool to Canada. So thank you. Yes, you didn't get to say as many words as we would have liked to. But if you have additional questions, we'd be happy to talk to you. Thank you very much.